Okay, so um, you've also taken more or less taken some of the elements of the canceled novel Alien Exodus, which planned on tying all of George Lucas's works into one cohesive mythos. Um, you you've kind of taken that and rolled it into um, everything he's even touched. Like um, I find that fact because yeah. So this is bringing me into our next section, namely crossover elements.
Mm,
So
another controversial one.
I was about to say very controversial. Um, so could you would you mind explaining this grand unification theory? Because like you said in your end notes, you were more or less continuing the tradition of classic pulp fantasy writers with Alan Dean Foster putting in Cthulhu and Splinter of the Mind's Eye. I'll put up screenshots of your explanation in your end notes up on screen here. But is there anything more you'd like
Well,
to say about it?
yeah, as there's two minds, that fans have on this subject, and there are those who really, really hate that. They hate crossovers at all, and when they come upon them in the EU,
They just roll their
they
eyes
they,
and
they just roll their eyes or they just dismiss it as, oh, that's just a playful homage. And all right, that's fair. Again, like I am not discounting their perspective and have really tried to go out of my way, leave room for those fans to say, okay, yeah, it's just purely coincidental, and 100% that's legitimate. On the other hand, are the other fans who love that stuff, like are really, really into it, and I cannot tell you how many like emails I've gotten in response to that. Oh, thank you for so much for including this, or I've always felt that there was this tie here, and blah, 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 and I love that. And it's ironic because I was never myself a big crossover fan.
mm-hmm.
In large part because I always felt it was crass. It was purely done for crass commercialism. But in the EU, that's not the case. At least not to my experience. So when Michael Reeves puts in references to Black Star, an old 1980 81 animated series. It just ran the one season. It was fantastic, pure space opera, like fantasy kind of thing. And he co-wrote many of the episodes, so he puts in direct references to that, and that blows my mind. I actually loved that because he made that series like part of this sprawling universe. Um,
And there's a place for it.
when right,
Because
there
it's
are
so
places for these things.
because like what people don't realize is these expanses of time are so ridiculously colossal that
Yeah.
you could and space is so vast.
Yes.
Because
The Sky River Galaxy in particularly is one of the largest ever created in terms of spatial mass.
120,000 light years in diameter is bigger than the Milky Way. So you know, and
There's so much
totally
room
set in
spatially, and
place.
of course, like you said, temporally, there's room for these things to have occurred. However you choose to interpret them, and that's that was it. You cannot, at least I could not ignore the appearance of a xenomorph in the X-Wing
Right.
comics,
I wanted to
and
ask
also
about. Yeah. Sorry. Well, I'll ask about that later. Please continue.
and also Michael Reeves also mentions a xenomorph. So
Does he?
so from both ends.
Oh.
Yeah, in I think it's the second of the Coruscant Nights books, but don't quote me on that. It's in one of those.
Okay. Okay.
I forget where it appears, but it appears. So and a lot of the authors were doing that and were playing with these things. And unless you've
You see a
seen the
firefly.
media.
You see fireflies in the
Yes.
background of one comic. You
You
see.
see a Firefly class ship there in the background. So I thought it was important to take it seriously and say how.
I concur
Simple as
100%.
that. How?
Like
You
I.
know, and that's more research like that had to be done because these things have their own expanded universes. And I again, I want to respect those as well and take them into consideration and take them seriously. And whether or not you view, and this is what allows you to view them in different ways. Whereas, like you'll see in the end notes where it says, nope, purely coincidental. Okay, great, check. That could work. The
Draw your own
B
conclusions.
option, right, is well, it's similar to the media in which they appeared, but not exact. Okay, that's legit. Check. Or three, no, it's exactly like I saw it on TV, in,
Yeah.
in 1995. Check. That could work too. Um, by and large, and I personally take. It depends on what it is. I can take an A approach, a B approach, or a C approach, depending on the specific piece of lore that's being referenced. And others will take other approaches, and it's all good.
It's all good.
It's all good, but yeah, thank you. But due diligence meant having to take it seriously, at the very least.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean there are some. Yeah. We'll get into some. I have some very big questions on why they were included later. But the I yeah, when it comes to shared, like I've just adored this concept ever, like for always. Like even imagining stuff like Sherlock Holmes taking place in the same world as Doyle's The Lost World and whatnot. It's or all those classic authors like unless I'm mistaken, Conan the Barbarian and works have referenced like Lovecraftian stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because yeah, even so yeah, even between authors like that, like it's been a thing since the early 1900s at minimum. It's like
It begins, as far as I can tell, for genre fiction. It begins with L. Frank Baum in the book The Road to Oz, which I think was 1908, but I may be off by a few years. But the point is, at the end of that story, there's a large celebration, and the guests at this celebration are characters from nearly all of Baum's non-Oz fantasy books.
mm,
He just brought in all of these. It must have been for readers at the time who did read outside of the Oz series and were reading his other books. I mean, that must have been such a tremendous joy to see that. Oh wow! Like so, these stories are all part of this one ongoing series. That's amazing. Um, and then, like I said, this was followed up by how science fiction or space opera authors then treated the Mars stories of Edgar Rice Burroughs and how this they were doing kind of more unofficially.
right.
Um, and then you have in the 1920s, you've got Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, and Clark Ashton Smith, who, although they each had different worldviews, sometimes radically different worldviews, they were still having fun tying in their stories to one another's works and borrowing, like deities and creatures and events, um, and others joined that. So you'll see Henry Kuttner and you'll see like Manly Wade Wellman and other like authors that were particularly in Weird Tales, C.L. Moore jump in and begin to also play with this idea that this is all part of a shared universe. So this this concept of the crossover really does go back to the very beginnings of the genre. So it's a tried and true tradition,
I
and
suppose you
it
can
does
even go as
make a
far
lot.
back as to say the Trojan War was a.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's a really good point. There's a lot to be said um, about the stories from that period and moving forward um, from there, with different authors kind of having a dialogue with earlier authors and sometimes switching things up and sometimes building upon what came before. So yes, 100% you can go back, a few thousand years and you'll find that this is going on. So
There's
there
precedent.
is something, there's precedent, there's something, and people, not everybody, but a lot of people love that.
Me
And
among
they
them.
get a lot of joy from that thing. So,
I
you
recognize
know,
it. Yeah.
yeah, it's and especially again if it's done with heart, and if it's done not for to sell, not to cross sell, this series, because that's the unfortunate part is that Marvel and DC kind of ruined that a bit. And again, nothing against those who really liked all of that, but they overdid it in many respects because they wanted
Because
readers
the
to not
incursions
just
were
read.
to promote something else.
Yeah, 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 and sometimes to the point of absurdity, like where it just these things do not, cannot work, do not work, but you're forcing it because you want to sell this other thing, and that gives crossovers a bad name, you
Yeah.
know.
Because
It doesn't have to be that way.
I
Yeah.
concur totally. Like and I guess yeah, you were talking about DC and Marvel. Like I guess it sometimes because I say this as somebody who adores crossovers, but sometimes they kind of are to the detriment in terms of like you know with the X-Men being part of the greater Marvel universe, like their stories
Mm,
kind of don't fit in because like with this supposed
yeah.
anti-mutant
Yep.
bigotry like being
Bias.
commonplace. You,
Yeah.
you don't see that
Yep.
in like Spider-Man stories. Why does nobody assume he's a mutant? Why and
Exactly.
hate him for that? It's like, but but the way I see it is, there's always ways to explain. You just write more. But,
That's just it. A clever writer can find ways to make things work.
exactly.
Because it is a fictional universe, and you can build, and sometimes there are things that the audience, the reader, didn't know. Um, and so retcons are part of a living, breathing universe. They are 100% necessary, particularly when you have multiple authors contributing and multiple editors. Sorry, I'm chewing a cough drop here.
You're fine.
Um, there are going to be mistakes, despite the best intentions of everybody involved. And so retcons are it can really retcons actually when done right can see a whole new story emerge. So, and we see this in the EU. We've seen this several times, but so Palpatine, Obi-Wan first says, the Republic that has existed for, 1,000 generations, and then Palpatine, a few movies later, says, "The Republic that's
Thousand
existed for a
years.
thousand years."
So then they come up with the
Um,
Rusan Reformation stuff to explain that.
yes,
Like I find that
yeah,
brilliant.
yes, it is brilliant. That's what that's what retcons can do. Like and from that came these amazing stories. Um, and it's great. So for a fan reading it, it all
Supposed
makes sense. It all
contradictions can,
works.
yeah, in that case, led to opening a door for yeah, great stories. It's
Yeah.
yeah, skilled enough. Like I've seen there's a quote I very much agree with in that there's no such thing as a bad character or story, only bad writers. It's like and once a bad writer can become a good writer, and there's there's always,
Yeah.
these mediums always um, can expand and evolve.
Right, without having to not to get into modern, what's happened in more recent times, but it can be done without having to tear down what came before.
Very well
You know.
said. Very well said.
Yeah.
But right. So on to next question. So going back to, yeah, we were talking about Alien Exodus. I see there's references to every piece of media, everything George Lucas has touched. I did a little double take. I'm like, wait, when I saw the terminology for dinosaurs as sharp claws and long necks, I'm like, is that is that Land Before Time?
It
um,
is.
yeah, I was like, hold on. I didn't even know Lucas was involved in that. Um, but that was
I discovered a lot of things. Lucas had his fingertips in a lot of quite a lot more than I had initially realized back in the day. Like, oh wow, he was involved in this and this and this, and then all the Lucas Arts games that they had put out. I was
right.
like, oh,
Treasure Monkey Island and yeah,
and
the
on and on.
it goes on. I applaud you for finding those because I thought it was already extensive enough when it was just again Alien Exodus. The plot being escaping from the dystopian THX 1138 world with the descendants of American graffiti characters. With I'm not sure if there were Indiana Jones references, but now you've you've touched everything he's even laid a finger on. It's like wow.
I have to credit um, Harry Thornton and Corey Carter for helping with that because they were the ones that tracked down a lot of these obscure things and like I was like, oh God, Joe, here's another. It's like, oh,
Okay,
okay,
gotta put this in here.
like how do we? It's funny because some of them are like like things like Monkey Island. Like some of them can be just like fun like references, but others were more in depth. Like you couldn't
Right,
just
it's like, oh boy,
even just
how do I
name drop
implement this?
how right. 'Cause some of them had like foundational elements, which were fascinating and which I had sort of known about earlier, but like okay, well. Back to the drawing board, like this needs to be incorporated because this is a LucasArts game and this is part of the world building, like the literal sort of world building, galaxy building, perhaps. Um, and I don't want to leave any stone unturned. I love what Robert Sawyer, really started because I think it's a brilliant idea. It's such a wonderful way of honoring Lucas and honoring these stories that he created. Um, So that's one area where I'm like really fully on board with saying, yeah, I accept these as all, canonical. And then again, if you don't, that's fine. But, like it was Lucas, well, it was Spielberg and Lucas who together, did the ET crossover.
Right.
Um, so clearly they're not against the idea of crossovers.
Oh yeah. I mean, that actually brings me directly to my next question. So I
Mm.
see you've expanded that to most of Spielberg's works too. So yeah, because of the Asogians, it's I another page I did a double take at was reading about InGen and a certain particularly large shark. Uh, can't say I ever thought of Jaws as being a megalodon they cloned. That was quite nice tying together.
Thank you for saying that. I'm not the biggest Spielberg fanboy out there. And I know that's like contrary to like a lot of people from my generation, but I never really connected to Spielberg and his works in the ways that other fans did. So I mention this because I kind of want, you and others to know that this isn't a vanity thing. Like, oh my God, I love Spielberg so much, and I have to put him in. I could take or leave a lot of his works. Which again is a controversial statement, and apologies to like really like serious fans. But when it came to his works and the fact that he and Lucas have a special relationship, a special friendship, through obviously Indiana Jones and through E.T. and through their years long relationship. Again, to me, it was just a matter of, well, I want to respect this. I want to show reverence to these things, and I want to take them seriously. I mean, Robert Sawyer kind of had plans to sort of tie that in the sort of Han Solo and Indiana Jones connection, which he didn't get to do. But I know that that was part of the plan that he'd had in mind, that they were like distant relations from like generations apart. Um, and so it's some people might think that that's silly, whatever. I mean, I'm just following the trail, of breadcrumbs, and you guys take it or leave it. But Lucas has this reverence for Spielberg, and so I felt like, well, this work needs to extend that to him. That's where that came from.
Fair enough. Okay, viewers, we just had a little intermission right there. So if something sounds off, that's what happened. Um, so earlier we're talking about xenomorphs, and so I guess the inclusion of the Alien versus Predator franchise was with that xenomorph walking in a crowd, and I guess you said there was the name mention in one of Michael Reeves's works. So, what made you decide that that was not just another race that resembled Xenos? Because I mean, that behavior does not match aliens in their source material. Because I mean, I guess because I didn't know about the latter mention. I guess that's it. But because a Xeno, I don't think would just be walking around in a crowd.
Not likely, it seems. No, but now that we know that the queens can control the drones, and empresses, they have really weird, interesting powers. The empresses and even some of the queens.
So you went into some of the deep Dark Horse stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Again, it's just a matter of wanting to respect like their expanded universe.
Yeah, you really did, because like even I was surprised you even went into some of the more recent Predator stuff that like shows that with they kind of retconned some old book lore with the Hishkoten stuff.
Yep.
That you brought that in, and then you also rolled with the fan theory that that Prometheus is Alien Covenant's as supposed origin was not. Let me rephrase that. Let me actually look at my notes so I'm not just rambling. You're rolling with the idea that the Malakak or Malak or we're imitating an even older race, which is a common theory on the deeper end of the alien fandom. And I like that you made them the Kravaki, which really do look like the original quote-unquote space jockeys. And apologies to any non-alien fan viewers who have no idea what we're talking about.
Telling you, some of these things they just write themselves. It's the amount of synchronicity that I came upon was sometimes astounding. Like, how did how did nobody notice this before? Or maybe they did, and they were discussed in fan circles. But it's fun to really to work with that and bring it a bit more to the fore, so that fans who maybe never thought of that before or were thinking about that were like, oh my God, like there it is, like Uh, I love all that stuff. So it's great. And again, if you don't like it, that's cool too. Like it's easy to just say, well, it's not that. It's, it's something similar but not that. But for those of us who enjoy that, it's that was if you're going to do this kind of thing, dig deep. Don't just stay at the surface level. Like, you know, what is the lore saying,
Yeah.
and what are the connections there? And that sometimes led to like the funny thing. It's there's a quote I put in somewhere in the end notes, but like that's a rabbit hole that has no end
Oh yes.
because it one thing leads to another, which
Tumbling
leads to
down.
another, which leads to another. And there are connections to connections that you may not have realized. So it's yeah, these things were done, I hope, carefully and certainly with time. Um, and a lot of thought put into sort of doing it right as well as I could possibly do it. That's really, pretty much the extent of what I'm trying to convey, is that this wasn't done haphazardly or cheekily. It was done with, with serious consideration.
I believe it. That So that brings me to asking about a handful of these that I have no idea what connection they have to Star Wars media. So to start off with the planet Ravath, um, is all that is that the last Airbender? Because I mean, besides the arrow on Sergeant at the time Appo's helmet, referencing Appa the Sky Bison. What's up with that?
I cannot confirm nor deny this allegation. There, are- there are. I'll say this though: there are a lot of things to catch if you want to go deep into this. And some of those things I did reference in the end notes. I did give credit to, and other things I didn't, because I think there's more fun in discovering things. Um, and there's a lot there. So I don't fear that we will, get an exhaustive. And I've even forgotten, like, a lot of them myself. Um, so yeah, what works, what doesn't work. These can be very subjective decisions that are made. And Ravath was an important planet because it's where Talatni sort of tests her plans for the universe, like in her usurpation of the Celestials in the universe. Um, but worlds need to have histories. It really is the bottom line. Like, this is a lived-in universe. Even in ancient times, this is a lived-in universe. And by the time the architects are operating, they're we've been in
They've
the
already
what do
been
we
so
call it?
far
The
past
vernal.
the
Yes.
Celestials and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. And these races have been living a long time. So there has to be history. I can build a history from scratch, which is certainly a legitimate approach, and was done in certain circumstances. But I can also borrow a pre-existing history that has tangential ties to Star Wars.
Hmm.
Um, and that's, in many respects, that's more challenging because it's got to be done right. Um, and it has to be done with serious consideration for the larger picture. And some things are very self-contained, so they don't always have to be so sprawling, but some things are sprawling. So it depends. Like I said, once you go down this rabbit hole, I'm not sure I've even come up out of it yet. I think I'm still down this rabbit
Still
hole
tumbling
somewhere.
down. That's funny. But
So yeah, you may have caught one there. That was a tremendous amount of fun to play with.
I
Again,
believe
unofficially, it's an
unofficial.
unofficial play with, right? Because it has
if
to be.
if that were the, I mean, if in the scenario, so you said that even with tangential connect, is that just from Filoni's involvement in both, or
That may have been the impetus. Like like one of the great things about having a team, it's kind of like a writer's room, yeah, for a television series, is that everyone is free to throw in ideas. And I also, incidentally, outside of that, even like fans would write me with ideas. Like they'd read the beta version and they would write me and say, "Hey, did you consider this? And did you know that this is tied to this through this?" And I welcome all that because every fan's, imagination and is valid to me. Whether I accept it or not is another matter, but you know, that's also sort of subjective. Like, okay, can this work? Should this work? How can this work? And that was one of those scenarios where the idea was tossed about, and I liked it. I thought it was a cool concept, and I thought this could work, and I see how this can work. Um, whereas there was other things where I didn't know the source material well enough, or and in some cases I got to know the source material. Like I said, okay, I'll delve into this. Um, so there was a lot of that too. But you can't do that with everything. Under this, there's a lot.
oh yeah,
There's a lot. I mean, you saw the list in the end notes. I mean, a lot of that I was already familiar with, but not all of it. And then there's again, you have to look at the expanded, universe sources for these things as well. So there's a tremendous amount of homework involved. But it's fun. This is good homework. This is enjoyable, things. Uh, I think I lost. I think I lost your question there. I don't know if I answered it or if I just ran in a complete other direction. So apologies.
no, no, it's fine. No, I just I was just wondering of my own if because you talked about how yeah, AVP is via Coruscant Knights, and
Mm.
so I just wanted to know what ATLA was via.
Baloney may have been the connection to that there.
Oh, so you don't? It's been a while since you were. Okay, fair enough. You don't recall. That's fair.
That's yeah. You're gonna find that's another frustrating part of this is sometimes forgetting. Like because these things are in many cases they are from a long time ago. I keep using that expression, but it's valid. Like, and there is so much. There's there's so much in this book that it is easy to sort of forget.
I
And
mean,
I can't tell you how
this
many
this
times
this
I
thing is
would.
colossal. I don't fault you at all.
There are so many times where Corey would ask, like, because Corey recently did, and is finishing up the Atlas, the Supernatural Encounters Atlas,
Corey is one of
and
your
he would ask me
editors.
questions. He's one of the editors, fantastic guy from Australia, who was tremendously helpful with a lot of these things, and did a lot of his own research as well. So he would ask me like, "All right, so where did this come from? Where does this race come from? Where does this connection come from?" And I would have to really, really think, and sometimes just like do like a Google search to see like because my notes, which I had at one time, most of those I didn't keep. Like once
Sorry to
I
hear.
incorporate, yeah, I know. I guess kind of foolish. I didn't think that they would have any value, to be honest with you. And I don't like clutter. For me, like clutter interferes with the process. I just feel like overwhelmed. when I have a cluttered desk. So, but what I really ought to have done, in all honesty, was just have a folder and just put these things in folders, and that really would have solved the problem of clutter. So, a bit of short-sightedness on my part in that regard. There were some notes I saved, which I've since given to Kyle, who wants to digitize them. I mean, they're just scribblings on the backs of envelopes and napkins and anything I could get my hands on to kind of keep track of certain races and places and things. And then once it was incorporated in the body of the story, I I did away with it. So I didn't always remember, but together, like by together we've managed to kind of track down, and he's been like almost like creating new notes, because that stuff is
Should I consult him
important to him.
for some of these, wondering where the crossover elements come from?
Yes, and then of course I'll chime in and say I cannot confirm or deny if this if this is real. Again,
Uh,
just because I don't want to impose, I don't want to impose that
right.
on the reader.
Well, I mean
I don't want
that's
to
the
make
very whole
yeah,
point
yeah,
of your grand
yeah,
unified
yeah.
and theory and the
It's the whole thing. I mean,
and your
even the way
distaste
this whole
for
thing is
word of mouth.
structured do you take is Hextrafon, is his testimony fully valid? Is it tainted by, mental, turpitude? Are there other factors at play? So, the whole thing is structured in such a way as to allow the reader his interpretation. Again, which I think is more interesting, um, particularly when you're dealing with subjects of metaphysical nature and of ancient history, and a lot of the questions that are raised. I don't know. So,
Yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, going on. There's a I chuckled at the Con Ami and Capcom like stuff with the Galaga and other gaming references. That was really amusing. I guess
huh, I,
the
I wasn't sure anybody would pick up on that. That's neat that
yeah.
you did.
No, I find it interesting. I mean, because yeah, I imagine there was definitely some influence from Star Wars in that. So it's like, oh yeah, well, I guess that makes sense. Um, so yet again, I have to ask why on the inclusion of two pieces of media, 2001: A Space Odyssey and Dead Space. Found it interesting you connected the black monoliths and black markers. Is there references in their media that you can recall, or should I be asking who? What was the name of your
Corey Gardner.
Corey? Corey.
Yeah, Corey. Yeah. Some things, some ideas that emerged ended up being so close to like pre-established media that it just made sense to kind of go full throttle and make the connection,
Mm,
because it was like, oh, all right, that's actually really close to what Arthur C. Clarke wrote. Um, Too close for me to be comfortable with, you know,
not referencing it
to
over and
not
over.
do. Yeah, like it almost like if weird because it almost felt disrespectful to not do it. But by the same token,
So
I was taking it in a different direction anyway than he had intended. So that's one of those where it's it's hinted at. It's not concrete, but it's sort of hinted that this could be a way of recontextualizing that whole thing. Um, yeah. So there are different ways of playing. They're not all sort of straightforward. Some of these things are a bit more obtuse or kind of around the corner a bit. There's
fair
a
enough.
few others that are like that, where the the concept sort of thematically there has to be a reason for all of these things. Like you have it can't. I don't know. I mean, some things can be just for fun. That's fair.
Okay, fair enough.
By and
So
large,
if that's the case
yeah.
for
Some
some of
some
these, please do say so. Because yeah, like I when I well, my following question was on Metroid. the like the I myself thought about how oddly resemblatory. That's not a word in English. How
you can make it up.
I hereby coined the term resemblatory. Um, how the that Japanese exclusive Star Wars SNES game, there was that dark side entity, which Gyaosubeda, which heavily resembles Ridley from Metroid, and then
Yep.
I like how connected all that stuff to Alien, given how clearly that references the prior series. Like, I mean, Ridley is named after Ridley Scott for one, and then the whole dark
Yep.
sci-fi aesthetic. That's all. I love all that stuff, and I guess, and I'm assuming it's via that that the whole Star Fox Lilat Wars stuff comes in.
Yeah, that's correct, and this is what I mean about like the rabbit hole and
Space-time
the
Prince.
burrow, this underground burrow that you don't know when you first go down the hole how expansive and interconnected so much of this is. But again, there has to be a thematic reason. And in that story that you just cited, it 100% develops the theme. It reinforces the theme. To quote Lucas, about like it's like poetry, it rhymes, like
Said the thing.
that's the thing, and I see his point like more and more, um, that these themes are actually really relevant, maybe more now in the age of AI than they were, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Um,
Oh
and
yeah.
so I think that's what makes them, or for me at least, made them fascinating and relevant and capable of connecting because they reinforce those themes that the overall story is developing. It's developing lots of different themes, um, but that's one of them. The idea of un if there's no governance, if there's no moral governance on science and what can be done with it, what are the
Mhm.
consequences of that? And that's what that story
So a
really
lot of
kind of
sci-fi.
developed. Yeah, a lot of sci-fi, which sadly gets sort of ignored. People watch it, for the entertainment value, but they completely, miss. But I think in literature, I think readers do tend to be more resonant with thematic material, which sounds horribly elitist now that I've just said it. It sounds like I'm saying that
No, no.
movies.
There's different
My
mediums.
apologies for that.
No,
Yeah,
connect in different ways.
yeah. There absolutely are cinephiles that do 100%, look at the themes of things, and so yes, that's there. I think what I'm sort of trying and failing to say is that readers are more attuned to catching and seeing those themes and maybe even expecting them in some regards like that's so anyway. Yeah, when you mentioned that particular crossover, that's where my mind was, oh wow, this theme, not only does it connect to aliens in some very interesting ways, but it has an underlying, I think, moral value that I'd like to explore a bit. And I knew how it, like I could see in my brain how it fit, like narrative wise.
Yeah,
Um,
I could totally
so
see the Chozo. Sorry, Chojinzoku, uh, being around in ancient days, playing around with the Malakak. I mean Malak. I mean, wait, which is the version that's the canon and the I? Never mind. um,
No, I think you think you got it there. Yeah.
um, but yeah, no. Talking about AI, yeah, there were those other ones you touched upon. I guess then Terminator, Matrix. That there was. I mean, well, and then you tied a lot of the, yeah, I guess the more robotic threats via my Battlestar Galactica knowledge is limited, but with you having the
Mm.
I mean Xylons, uh,
Which are from the EU, the Xylon. That's
oh
like,
really?
I didn't invent that.
Oh really?
Yeah, yeah, that's an obscure, yeah. But they were very undefined as to what they were, and so that was easy. That was that
Oh,
was easy
I
to sort of borrow that and apply
oh
it,
that's
you know.
that's
Yeah,
wonderful. That,
yeah.
my absolute favorite thing is just expanding upon previous things. Like I'm not a I am people say I'm the creative type, but
Mm.
everything I do is I wouldn't say derivative, but I just love doing and seeing the expansion of previously less expansive things. So be it, taking a one-off race from seen in one obscure piece of media, or be it finding connections between some things. I just adore that.
I do as well, and I think that is absolutely creative, and anyone who says otherwise doesn't understand how creativity works, and how it does build from other things, and there's nothing new under the sun, really.
Very much.
So yeah, so that's 100%. I think you have a creative mind.
Why? Thank you. um, but so the last two crossovers I have questions on. Um, Mass Effect, Turian, Solarian, Thresher Maws. You've mentioned all those, and your your explanation with the Reapers. I mean, I figured if you were to bring them into Star Wars, the obvious thing would be to connect them with the Silentium. I mean, giant black robotic space cephalopods and or orbs with glowing red eyes. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. There's there are times to tie things together, and then there are times not to, because we are dealing with epochs of time. It has to make sense. Like, it has to work all chronologically, not just thematically, but chronologically as well, because it is a history. And in the real world, sometimes things do develop independently of each other that are very similar. So
Convergent
it
evolution.
didn't. Right, right. So you don't. I speak to you and to anyone out there who's a writer or in the arts of any kind, but you don't always want to tie everything together. That's an easy mistake to make, um, because and it's particularly in a galaxy that is so vast with so many cultures. It is important that s- these similar ideas arise independently of each other. Um, so that's I actually find that as interesting as the things that are connected, or that are where one draws from the other. Because, like, if you recall, like, a piece of silentium does end up in the hands of a certain group, which ends up in the hands of another person, which ends up causing a whole other catastrophe, down the line. Um, so there so that's just it. It's a balance. Always a balancing act to know when to connect and when not to connect. But ultimately, this is why the story must tell itself. It, I say independent of the storyteller. What, and again, always sounds weird. like when I say that out loud, but that's just how it is.
That's how it is.
It has a mind of its own, and it has dictates of its own. So if you try to force something, it will feel forced. It'll feel for if thankfully, like if you've been doing this long enough, you'll struggle with it and you won't be able to find a way out. And that's how you know, I may have gone down a wrong path here because this isn't working. And nothing, and that happened a few times where like entire chapters where this is this is nonsense. This it's nonsense. I can't make it not be nonsense. It has to go. Or has to be or be completely reconceived in a way that is not nonsense, in a way that is feels organic to the story. So I'm glad that you brought that up because I actually don't get it oftentimes a chance to um, articulate that part of the process. It's it's interesting. Like people think writing, you're just kind of sitting back on a beach and like la di da. That's not how it's
It's
ever
not
been
just
for
think,
me.
oh, I want to put this in. Oh, I want to put this in. It's not.
It's not. It's a tremendous amount of mental energy. And if you in a lot of kind of self, you, you kind of have to have a bit of humility or develop it if you don't have it already to recognize. And this is again the importance of having good editors that aren't afraid to tell you the truth. And I've always encouraged my proofreaders and editors to be 100% frank and honest. Like, this doesn't feel right to me. Is this working for you? And do you see a solution out? Am I missing something? Like it's it's a it's a blessing to have that. Not everyone gets to have that, but I got to have that, and let me tell you, that is a true blessing. Um, and that's what a good. I'm also an editor in another part of my life where I run a small press publishing company, and I edit and publish the works of other writers, and I'm a very hands-on editor in that regard, um, because I want the story to be the best it can be, and so I appreciate writers who aren't so precious about their work,
Hmm.
because you can't work with people like that who are like very um stories. Were we discussing this earlier? Stories are collaborative efforts
Yeah.
in many regards, and the input of others is invaluable. And the input of fans is invaluable. I was, and am a fan, and would go through the TFN forums and read the theories and say, that's brilliant. Like someone needs to take that and run with that, you know? Um, because fans are smart and they've got this wealth of ideas. So it's a community, it's a tribe, like we build each other up, iron sharpens iron. Anyway, I've really gone off a tangent, so apologies.
They're always fascinating to listen to. But
Thank you.
um, yeah, no, not sure how to respond articulately to something like that. So I guess I'll go to the next one, the next final crossover element I want to ask about. That being with the Ankh, it's led by Zarech. Um, why
Yep.
why the why the inclusion of that? but
I don't know. Um, I I
I need to
don't know.
I need to
I'm
ask.
not
Remind me the name of your editor.
a Corey Carter.
Corey Carter. Okay.
Um yeah. Yeah. I that one sometimes it's just a feeling like because I don't have time unfortunately to play um video games like modern games. I wish I did. I
Well,
don't.
this
Like
is a
even
tabletop game, but
yeah, right, right. That's true. That's a
but
good point. I don't have time for those either. Um,
yes.
so uh,
So some of these
oftentimes,
were more editor inclusions.
sometimes, yeah, or fan idea suggestions where they said, "Oh, did you know?" Like there were some cases where certain games were intended to be Star Wars games, and kind of like
Oh,
with
you know
Rebel Moon,
what?
like this.
Now that you mention
Mm-hmm.
it,
Mm-hmm.
I think that why I think I know
Yeah.
why you put in Mass Effect. KOTOR 3, a lot of that, a lot of those story beats meant for it ended up in Mass Effect. You know,
Right.
Canderous Ordo's storyline ended up becoming, or not Rex's. And, I mean, there's the Turian named Nihilus with white and red face markings. I wonder who that could be referencing. Uh, yeah,
You have to be very careful with these things because they have rich, and deep lores, and
yeah, that's.
you, sometimes, yeah,
Well, actually,
sometimes it's true. You end up compressing chronology without intending to, or sometimes intentionally
yeah,
to
yeah.
make it work. But chronology is a weird thing too, where there is space oftentimes for that, and there is space for historian error. They're historians, are historians.
That's true. Because
W-
I did want to
And yeah,
think and ask about like how, you know, in those last two respective series, I mean, the Reaper cycle is supposed to have spanned billions of years, and the
exactly right.
Necrontyr were were transformed. Sorry, Ankh were transformed circa 65 million years. It's like, but Sky River and its satellites were only several tens of thousands, I think. So it's like, I guess in this case, in this one case, I would have to be in your pick and choose approach. I would have to say there's more coincidence than it just being straight up,
Yeah,
but these are extreme. I don't
agreed.
know. Sorry, I keep interrupting you. Please.
No, no, don't. I'm in agreement with you because oftentimes I'm not even sure. And I have different theories as to how that could work. And and we see like with examples, in real life where, ruling leaders will exaggerate, the importance of their people or the length of time in which, they reigned. We see this with like Assyrian kings as an example, going
Right.
back to ancient history. Uh, but even there are modern examples of, you know leaders lying about what truth is, to bolster
Right.
themselves or to bolster their regime.
Unreliable narrators.
Yeah, there's a lot of narrators that you have to kind of parse through, and so there is space to say, yeah, this lunatic race of of predators, you know, uh, of murderers, very well may, be out of their minds and maybe exaggerating, or maybe exaggerating for the purpose of intimidation. And some bought into it, thinking that this was, authentic historical, veracity, and some do not. So there, and
But
so
it does
that's why
add
a lot of the
to the
conversations.
richness of a setting, I'd say. That's, you know, having multiple. I mean, that kind of that kind of brings me to a question I wanted to ask later, but the well, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna say that. So one of my absolute favorite things in media, we've talked about this earlier, is simply when the audience or readers are allowed to draw their own conclusions. And um, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Elder Scrolls lore and its fan base, but I found your idea it rather similar to the writings of Michael Kirkbride, where he
Mm.
deconstructs the very idea of canon and lets the readers slash players decide what they want to accept. And, you know, as you said, that one of the Sobek derived races is called Saxil, and there's Nern in your map of Illithurian. Would I be correct in assuming something's there?
Yes. Yes, you would be.
That's simple. Okay, cool. um,
and I think once you take the plunge,
You keep
you
finding
you're
things.
there. Yeah, you're there. Like it's like, all right, I've done this now. There's no sense in holding back, save for again how it interacts with the story. So does it add to the story? Does it detract from the story? Is it pointless? Is it well, parallel to the story? And those are always the questions that you ask when you decide, okay, let's take the leap and let's include this. Because ultimately you want to you want to paint as much as you can on this canvas. Like we're developing an ancient world that covers long spans of time. And yes, again, you can make it up from scratch, and in many cases I did, but in many other cases, this is a great way of filling in this corner of the galaxy, this planet, these people, these events, and in some senses, so if you know the references, it's a wonderful shortcut for fans to be like, oh, cool. So these events may have happened here. Great. So it's more relatable to the reader in that regard. And that's not going to obviously work for every fan because not every fan is familiar with every reference. But they may be familiar with enough references that it's a nice shortcut for them to be like, oh, cool, I know this. I know what's going on here.
Right.
This isn't old, foreign, and exotic and alien to my imagination. Because again, this is a very, very dense sort of work that requires a lot from the reader. Um, so having these shortcuts, I think can make things easier for them in some respects, and it also easier for me too because I can plug it in. I don't have to build every aspect of this society from scratch, which can be very time consuming
Oh,
and
definitely.
yeah, and
There's because yeah, as you said, adding to add history to this corner of the galaxy, because in theory, everywhere has a we know all about Coruscant's history. Like theoretically, most other planets should have histories just as extensive and complex as that, and it just
100%.
so that
Yes.
I guess
So
that
how do you
that
do that
raises.
without it becoming a 16 volume set? You know,
Yeah.
like like this that's the thing, like as big as SE is, I mean it could easily have spilled over into many, many volumes because you're dealing with so many worlds and cultures and people. So you have to have a shorthand in many respects because you don't have that luxury to do that. And frankly, I I don't want to do that. I want to leave it open for all of you guys to, whether you're doing RPGs or you're doing art or you're writing stories or you're just kind of having fun thinking about all of this, and like playing with it in your mind. Yeah, you guys take this and run. Like that was kind of the intent. Yeah, the cosmic war. So this was the balance with the cosmic wars. It's like it has to have enough. It has to have enough to be concrete and to be an actual time period with actual, players within it, and events and characters and story,
Yeah.
but not so much, like just enough to be a springboard for now you guys to run and expand it further because this is
You are
the
sounding like my forge
expanded.
bride.
Oh, really? Cool. I thank you. I consider it an expanding universe. And this goes back to our earlier conversation about, like So if Lucasfilm decides to move ahead and continue Legends, fabulous, fantastic, great. But whether they do or not, ultimately doesn't matter because you guys, you guys can now take this and run. And I know some of you already have, because I've been told, like, oh, I'm writing a story, based on the Three Sisters, or I'm writing a story, about the KOTOR era, and I'm gonna include stuff from like all of that. That's what that's what world building is. It's a communal thing. We are a community, you know, of different kinds of people who want to, play with this thing in different ways. So let's not close this. Let's not have a doom and gloom approach. Let's celebrate this and run with it and just keep building. However you want to do that, whether it's talking about it or writing or arts or cosplay,
Very
so
well
that was
said.
well, thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, had an alarm go off. Um, yeah, wow, that was I don't know what to say other than wow. um, a lot to think about there. Wow, I'm when I go back and edit this, I'm probably going to listen to that several times. But wow,
Cool.
I don't know what else.
That's
Huh?
it's what the passion is. I mean, we people who don't have a love for a hobby, like this, don't understand
Oh yeah,
necessarily. So if they have a hobby, they get it. Like if they have a thing, and I don't care what it is. I mean, it could be gardening, like
yeah.
um
Everybody has
there's a s-
something.
every hopefully, like I would
Hopefully,
hope that everybody does have that. It saddens me. I have met people that don't seem to. Um and I think that's from more of a prior generational thing. Maybe it's just because that opportunity never presented itself. They had to work from a young age, and again, that's sad to me because there is a love affair here that we have with this thing, with story, with art.
yeah.
Um, it is art. I don't care, I don't care what how people will dismiss Star Wars. It is art. It's high and it's low, but it's art. Um, and so when you have that passion, you want it to grow, and you want to grow it with your friends, and you want to grow it with family, you want to grow it wherever you can grow it, because it's love. That's what love is, ultimately. So let's not let it die. We are not going to let the past die. We're
Uh-huh.
we're going to bring the past into the future. Sorry, Kylo, you were wrong.
Very well
you know.
said. Wow. Very well said. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to. Yeah, okay. I guess going onward, I'm just before I get too flabbergasted. I guess we just have to move on. Um, there are two things I was surprised you didn't end up linking. Um, I'm because I mean I'm going to go out on a limb and assume Tolkien is a big reference, a big inspiration to you, and um, there's already two planets called Endor and Arda, which I thought would be an easy springboard. But I guess you were talking about earlier about you need to know when not to pursue.
I adore Tolkien. He's probably my favorite writer, or my second favorite. Clark Ashton Smith is like my other competing favorite writer. Um, and it's funny that you say that because I read a review where someone's like, "Oh, this is he just like literally took Tolkien and put it in there," and everyone's entitled to their opinion, so that's whatever, cool. But it wasn't conscious. The Sapphire. were determined by Leland Chi to
Right.
basically be
Elfin.
in any point. Yeah, yeah, we're basically elfin. Um, but the Sephi, although they certainly have elvish traits. You can see, elements of Noldor or some of the other races there. They're not the same. Like so, in respect to Tolkien's world, Arda is our prehistory.
Right.
It's
In a different.
so if
I
there's
believe he called it in a different state of imagination, because like
Mhm.
because like he said, it obviously doesn't fit with our understanding of plate tectonics, and it just would not fit. But yeah, in a different state of imagination, which I find very
True,
fascinating.
true, yeah. Although our understanding of things is always changing,
Well,
and
there is that.
so
Yeah.
yeah, there is always that. But of course, I mean, did Balerion split from, probably not. So yes, in our state of imagination. So if it exists in context to this world, the Sky River universe, it would have been as a prehistory of Eartha.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Eartha, you are referring to the Prime Universe version.
right, which
Yes.
would be essentially Earth, our Earth.
Yeah.
Um, so, and there are allusions that you'll find to the idea of that. And that's all they are. They're just illusions because that's the extent of the connectivity, really, is.
Fair enough.
Well, there is more extent, obviously, because in the creation myth account, there are parallels to what we see, in was it Anu Lindale?
Oh
Was the
yeah.
creation? Yeah.
I wanted to
So
get into this later, but I definitely like you talk in the because I have this segment on philosophy, but if we want to get into this quickly, you in the segment where Cody Sunchild meets they talk about how they viewed creation as a song, and I'm like, hmm, hmm.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's right. It's all there, it's all pretty much right there. So that's where you're seeing those sort of allusions to, without it being so direct and without it being like hitting you on the face. But I love the idea of it because it's essentially about beauty, like the creation comes through the height of beauty, the height of art. Um, uh, the spoken word, the song, which elevates that to the next level. The combination of the two together, poetry and music. The joining of voices. So again, we're bringing in a community to play. These are all, you know, again, high art again, and so we're tapping into these mythic, um, imaginative things, because I think they work, and I think they are, um, like I and this can go even deeper into sort of metaphysical areas, but Tolkien really did capture something there. And so I was proud to be able to sort of allude to that. So that's when you say, like, the connectivity, like it's there, but it's subtle. It's intended to be a bit more subtle than overt. But for those who catch it,
There's
it
some
seems
there.
obvious. Yeah, there's something there.
Do you think you know George calling his moon Endor is a coincidence or an illusion?
I
Not an
don't think it's a
illusion.
coincidence. I really don't. The Witch of Endor is not an uncommon story. So I don't know. I don't know if he had the two Ewok films in mind. When he was conceiving.
Oh,
Because
right,
she
the
obviously,
biblical story.
yeah,
I was
yeah, because obviously, like Charles doesn't play a role, in Return of the Jedi, which
uh-huh.
would have been cool actually if she had like, that added element. I think would have been fun, um, and added a bit more um to what was going on Endor. But he developed Endor later on, and obviously, Paul Dini and others took that and ran with it. But so Tolkien definitely knew Tolkien. Listen to me. Lucas definitely knew Tolkien's work. There's a scene that he wrote into an early draft, which is an almost word for word quote of Gandalf's.
Really nice.
I think it's in the end notes. I'm pretty sure that I put it in there because I wanted readers to kind of see just how closely Lucas was hewing to Lord of the Rings. When he wrote this thing. So this must have been 75, 76,
Right, when it was still the
probably
Adventures
70.
of Luke Starkiller.
Yeah. So it is. So these ties exist, and have existed for quite some time. It really was just a matter of uncovering them and playing with them a little bit. Having fun with them, and drawing not necessarily strings together, but kind of echoing. That's really more what it is. You're echoing
Echoing. That's a
earlier
good word.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fair enough. Um, go.
It gives the readers a touch point, you know, again, so that it's not all so alien. It's another way of creating a touch point in something that is kind of so vast and intricate that, oh, okay, oh, that's familiar.
Right.
That, yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah.
That is nice to have. Though I guess there's the finding the fine line between homage and ripoff.
Always.
Yeah, I mean you compare
Always.
Games Workshop's 40K, like they called their space elven race the Eldar, which is taken straight from.
Directly. Yeah. Right.
So it's like,
And
well,
and yeah, yeah, no,
so
so like
I guess it's all
yeah,
a matter of context and how commercial something is. I don't know.
yeah, like how to bring this in, like so why use Eldar as a term? Like is it because like oh well I was thinking about the elves. I was gonna name it something else, but I forgot. Like is it some like or is it like no, I want to have players have this in mind, have Tolkien in mind.
Mhm.
Or is it even deeper still? Like, so I don't know with them, like why, but it does make me question it, like when I see it. Um, so, and that was the case with like the Yautia. It was like, well, how close do I bring this? Obviously you notice that in some cases I use different names.
Adding a
Because
little
I
E
wanted to
before
create a bit of
Yautja.
space. Yeah, right. So, but with the ELT, it was like, well, I can be more blatant with this. It's still a kind of a deep lore reference,
Mhm.
um, more for fans, of
Oh
that
yeah.
series, um, where it won't interfere with the average readers. It was like, but to me, that's a more explicit, or we can go more explicit with this. It's you're right. It's a fine line with every single thing. And I can't tell you like how many times I went back and forth with this in my head and on the page as to is this too far? Is this not far enough? You know, it's, that's why it took so long. It's another reason this thing took so long.
Totally fair. I mean, I'd probably be in the same shoes. Um, but I guess that brings me to my last question on well, or rather on when crossover that I didn't find. Uh, I was surprised there were no Transformers references because I mean that's probably the most prominent Star Wars crossover. I mean, albeit I guess it's just in merchandise, unless you consider Project Starscream a reference to said character. Um, I mean, Unicron would not be out of place at all among the immortal gods.
So that's interesting, and so that's I would like to see that story. So that's really my first thought when you talk about that is,
Sure.
ooh, yeah, somebody write that. You know, like because I that was one I couldn't. I that requires that would require another few months
Of
of
research into
research.
that lore.
Yeah, into that lore because if you're going to do it, it has to be done right. And I did not know enough, and I, I couldn't take that on. I couldn't take on like the length of time it would take to do it right.
That has its own cosmology and whatnot. So fair
It
enough.
really does. I've seen it, and I've friends who are big fans would tell me about it, and I'm like, that's a lot. That's a lot to get into. But hence why I say, man, if someone wants to write that, you know, and connect it to, where in the cosmic wars, please do so. I'll post it on my site, um that's what I told, I said early on, on my website is if anybody, wants a home for their Star Wars story that's connected to supernatural encounters, you've got a home. I'm happy to host it there. Because I think this is all great. Yeah, I want to see it.
You want to see it, and
What did
if
I
y'all need
leave
an
out?
editor, I'd be happy to help.
Cool.
I'm good at spell checking.
Nice.
Very good.
In fact, Corey is mentioning. Speaking of Corey, he is looking to start a project called Otherworldly Encounters, which, if you remember the section, I think I don't remember if it's in the Twilight Wars or if it's in the War of Temporal Planes, where I went kind of like with all like the alien races, and I went like down the A list and kind of like told like um a brief sort of history of what they were doing during this time period. I don't know if you remember that, but
With the
it
first book.
fascinated him. Um, there was who was included in that? The Arun included and the Arbrins,
Oh, I think I know what you're
and
talking. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So
I went
with
through the A's, and at the bottom it said, like cut for time and space.
oh, that's
So like, in
right.
other
That's
words,
right.
yeah. So Corey was really fascinated by that idea that, oh wow,
There's
like
theoretically
there's
even
like
more. It's already
theoretically like so he came up with the idea of doing like this otherworldly encounters and inviting writers to take a race and write a short story about what they were doing during this war, during this period of time. So it's probably too early for me to have even brought this up, but I wanted to because it's a fun project that others can get involved in. And like I said, we wanna build and we wanna expand and you know uh, because we don't want to be dependent on another entity to kind of continue this. And even if they did, they may not tackle this time period. I mean, they certainly had no interest in the ancient past, um, previously, which is why I was probably allowed to sort of like run with this whole thing because that was not something that was in their thoughts to really go into,
right. Dawn of the Jedi
earlier
started
than the Old
before
Republic. Yeah, yeah,
anything yet.
right. Uh, Dawn of the Jedi kind of came later, much later. So yeah. So anyway, sorry I went off on another tangent.
Nah, you are most fine. So the very, yeah, last thing in this section, um, potentially controversial. I'm not sure whether to cite it as a quote unquote crossover, but the theological aspects. I mean,
Mm,
with the Celestials, you've clearly taken a lot from the Abrahamic religions. I mean, Malachim, Seraphim, Cherubim, Ophanim. Uh, what do you have
yeah.
to say to people who say that's too on the nose? Am I correct in assuming that's to tie in with George Lucas's own faith? Where he's somewhat just jokingly described himself as a Methodist Buddhist. It's like
Yeah. And Lucas went on like even deeper in some later interviews, and I tried to quote the bulk of them in the end notes because I knew that was going to be controversial. But I also knew I read these interviews. I knew what he wanted, and I knew what he was hoping to do, which was start a dialogue about the question of God. Because he believed and believes that you know movies sort of took over from where church left off.
that's right.
And
I remember that.
yeah, you remember that one. Yeah. And so he felt that filmmakers had a responsibility in terms of moral truth. Uh and for him Star Wars was a way to not alienate. That's why the Force is as sort of incoherent in some respects. Um because he didn't want to alienate any potential viewers.
Right.
But by the same token, he wanted to postulate this idea that there's this higher power, and this has meaning because it's the light, and it's all about love and compassion and forgiveness, as opposed to the dark, which is oftentimes what we see operating in the world, which is
Ultimately.
greed and lust for power and this self-aggrandizement to the point where other people's lives don't matter and certain groups are seen as lower than others. And I love that. I've always thought that was fascinating. Whether you think his execution of these ideas or not, worked. Same with some of his political ideas. Whether you think that they worked or not is certainly a subject for debate and conversation.
Mhm.
But that wasn't my task. My task was to distill what are Lucas's what's important to him. What is he trying to convey? And how do I express that since we're dealing with cosmology and the origins of things? That's something that has to be gotten right. And hence the reason that there are so many quotes from him in the end notes because you have to have reverence for the person in whose universe you're playing in, and
Absolutely.
you really do. And in the EU is kind of a little bit all over the place. Like like certain sources say certain things, and other sources said other things.
I
And
imagine you're
to
talking
me,
about
that's
the concept of balance of the force.
That's one concept, absolutely. And ancient history is another one, where there was very once once it got into West End Games, once we were in sort of like 1986 onwards, and uh, well, really, actually, once Marvel lost the license because Dark Empire was going to be part of the Epic line, and Archie Goodwin was going to be editor over it. So once we lost Archie as kind of like sort of overseer of the EU, um, particularly because he did, if you remember, the Marvel comics and the newspaper strips,
Mhm.
and even when he wasn't writing it, he was editing it, so he was overseeing a lot of this.
Uh-huh.
So we kind of lost his and his ideas for what the cosmic wars were going to, unveil and entail. And I think people even lost sight of the fact that he even mentioned these things. So Western Games went and ran and did their own thing, and then Bantam kind of ran and did
Even a
their own.
Wikipedia page for them.
Right, exactly. Same thing. Like the Immortal Gods of the Sith were completely forgotten throughout the EU. I mean, look. I'm not complaining because that all allowed me to, who had been obsessing over these things for decades, and building, like ideas in my head. It allowed me to fill in that, like to really tell those stories, for which I'm grateful. But it is that, but that's how expansive the expanded universe is, that there are so many stories to tell on so many different levels. But in any case, so this was allotted to me to run with, and I had to take all of the disparate, sometimes seemingly contradictory, stories and ideas and make sense of them. And that's why the historical council emerged. That's why that frame story had to be,
I love that.
because I thought it was yeah, thank you. It was important that all views be presented. Um and that's why I don't see Janzikek as a I mean, he's certainly antagonistic to our heroes' friends, but I don't see him as a bad or evil person at all. I see him as the pragmatist in this thing, and raising very reasonable objections.
Yeah.
Um,
He just
and
has
so that
more
Lucas is
materialist.
right, exactly. Yeah, he's a rationalist here in this whole thing, and he's not the only one. There are plenty of others. So Lucas said he wanted to raise these questions. He wanted to get people to think about these deeper things, these metaphysical things, as well as political things as well.
Of course.
And having the historical council really, really debate heatedly at times, was a way to honor that, by saying, look, you've got all these perspectives now that are here before you, and yes, I mean, yes, Supernatural Encounters does have its own sort of perspective as well, but it's open-ended enough that even what happens at the end, which I won't. Well, you said this was spoilers, so I guess we could go
We're in
into
spoiler
spoilers.
territory.
I
You
mean,
can go. You can
yeah,
go.
so a supernatural event does occur at the end, but even with that, there are those who raise questions and say, but
Oh, it was a very good
Zavery,
hologram.
yes, yeah, like that's all that could be. Like, extremists can set up something like this, to try and convince us of this thing. Um, so
I
that
say
was.
again, drawing your own conclusions. That's one of the things I love about this book.
Thank you. Thank you. That's where the metaphysical stuff really does. It was, to honor that, and because it does happen to be a subject of great interest to me.
We can
So
definitely.
that was a natural fit.
Yeah, no, we will definitely get into that more on philosophy bit later on.
All right, cool.
And I'm actually working on a separate video about the connections of real philosophy / religions to Star Wars. Maybe I'll have to talk to you about that
Ah,
if you'd like to
cool.
give some
I'd
input.
like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Much appreciated. But
Sure.
moving on.